This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
What's up, jerks?
Manning retired. Which one? Both.
I like kickers.
Put him on the board. Hausch Mazzoli. Got it. Championship.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Nerds, brought to you by the Fan Up Network on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. As always, I am Jason Jarvi. Follow me on Twitter at Jarvi the King. And I feel like it was just yesterday, but it's already been a month since I said that it's almost July and football's almost here. And now it's literally almost August. I'm doing this episode in the wee hours of, Thursday night going into Friday morning, and training camps have finally opened in the NFL. We've got tons of news to really get to, so you guys can get ready for your fantasy drafts. But, we're just over a week away from the opening of preseason football with the Hall of Fame game, Packers-Colts. I know I'm going to tune in, at least for a little bit. I know that preseason football is nothing like the real deal. We're going to see the most vanilla offenses, the vanilla defenses as possible, but it's still football. It's something I don't have to watch baseball again. I don't have to suffer through another 9 innings of the Detroit Tigers letting me down. So that I'm so pumped for football to be back. And, even though I've been doing this season of the show since about May, this is really the time that you need to start ramping up your preparations, because with the beginning of preseason football really comes the beginning of all of your guys' fantasy drafts. If you're a smart league, you're gonna wait as long as you can. The league that I've been in the longest, the Slackjaws that I'm in with my brother and another guy that you'll hear on this show occasionally, Chris Hinks. We wait, and it's a Labor Day weekend every single year, and we make it a point that we hold off until then. So we let all of those season-ending injuries go by, and then we go into that. It's pretty much the week before games start, and we know everything that's happened. We know the guys who are getting cut. Maybe there's a veteran who was on a team that you drafted, and they didn't even make the team. So you don't run into those problems when you have late drafts. It's when you have these drafts in the first week of August, when you have those Jordy Nelson injuries that will just ruin your team for the rest of the year, because you probably drafted him really high. But with drafts coming, you really need to ramp up your getting prepared and ready for the draft. And I know some people, they like to wing it, and if you can do that, more power to you. I know I've looked at as much as I can, and I probably could go into a draft and really just wing it, if knowing kind of where guys are slotted. But even I like to still have a cheat sheet, and I encourage, if anything, go out and grab a fantasy football magazine, so you can at least have a reference of what have guys done in years past, and who may be injury prone. But then you have the hardcore people. You can research everything online. That's what I do. I love going on and looking up all the information. And that's I'm also here for you to try and digest all that information and spit it out to you, so you have a better understanding of who's going to be good going into this year. And if you want to take it even to the next level, you can do mock drafts. ESPN has a great setup. You can go on there pretty much at any time, and they have their mock draft lobby where you can join any type of draft, whether it's a 8-team league, a 10-team league, a 12-team league, anything from that, a PPR league, the different styles of drafts, whether it's a snake style or it's an auction draft. And I know I've done a couple mock drafts already, and I want to share with you one of the mock drafts that I did and kind of where my team ended up and how the way that I went into this mock draft. It's a 12-team league, and it was PPR. And the only thing I knew going in was that I wanted to wait on a quarterback. Because, the Cam Newtons, the Andrew Lucks, the Aaron Rodgers, they're going to go really high. And what I would rather do is stockpile talent at running back and wide receiver and hope that I'm going to get a decent quarterback a little bit later. And if that guy doesn't work out, that I'd be able to turn some of that talent that I drafted earlier into a starting quarterback. So that was really the only set goal that I had going into this mock draft. So when I got into the mock draft lobby, I could pick where I wanted, and I didn't want to go with the top overall pick. So I went with a little bit lower. I went to number 10. And, as the draft played out when it started, as I've been saying all year, is that the wide receivers they're going to be way more dependable for you going forward. And of the first 4 picks, 3 of them were wide receivers. Antonio Brown went first. Le'Veon Bell, this was before the supposed suspension. He went number 2, but then Odell Beckham and Julio Jones. Now, I think if this was done after the suspension, I think there's a possible chance that you see Antonio Brown, OBJ, and Julio Jones go 1, 2, 3, with maybe Todd Gurley or Adrian Peterson kind of sliding in to one of those top 4 slots. But as it went down to me, I was hoping that I would be able to go wide receiver in the first and second round and have that strong core. But I wasn't a huge fan I'm not a huge AJ Green guy of being your number 1 starter, and I didn't want to go the Rob Gronkowski and have that tight end spot locked up because I didn't like the spot at 10. So I went with Ezekiel Elliott, who I think it actually might be a steal at number 10 where he goes. He is a rookie, but the sky really is the limit for him on that Cowboys team. On the way back in round 2, the wide receivers, they weren't there. I didn't have a good feeling about Allen Robinson or Jordy Nelson, so I went with the next best running back in Doug Martin. So in the first 2 rounds, I did what I essentially played old school fantasy football and went running back, and I should have that position locked up for the entire season, unless one of those guys goes down. Coming back in round 3, I finally get my number 1 wide receiver, and I go Keenan Allen, who he is coming off of an injury, but I think he was early enough in the year that he's going to be healthy, completely healthy, and I think that's a really good spot for him in round 3. On the way back in the 4th round, get another guy coming back from injury in Kelvin Benjamin. I had a choice between Doug Baldwin and Michael Floyd as well, but I like the possibility of Kelvin Benjamin being in that offense in Carolina because we saw what Cam Newton did last year, and he did that with Ted Ginn and Philly Brown and Greg Olsen. So I think if you put Kelvin Benjamin back into that team, that offense does have the potential to be really dangerous. Coming back in round 5, I get my 3rd running back. I get Matt Jones. The wide receivers, again, because they are going so quick, the talent there, Dante Moncrief, Stephon Diggs, I wasn't huge on them. Round 6 was the first pick it was kind of a gut pick, and it wasn't really best available. It was more just a feeling. I went with Marvin Jones in round 6. I was targeting Delaney Walker to be that starting tight end who can get you a ton of points, but he went the pick right before me. So I had a choice between getting DeMarco Murray, which would have given me 4 running backs at the time, but I don't need 4 starting running backs. I think at most you really need a good solid 3 starting running backs, so you have your 2 starters and then your backup guy. I didn't need him, so I went with a a wide receiver who has the potential to do good in an offense that is obviously a passing offense. And I wasn't ready to take a quarterback at that point. I still think that was a little high. They're still there, but through the 6th and the 7th round, the quarterback run happened, and all those guys went. Luck, Breeze, Big Ben, and Tom Brady even went in the 6th round. That might be a little high for me, because that's a guy that you're drafting who he's not going to play for the first 4 weeks. So, that same guy, just quickly looking through the rest of his draft, I don't think he drafted another quarterback. He drafted a ton of wide receivers, and I get that this is only a mock draft, but that guy, he only drafted Tom Brady. Obviously, if we were in a real league, he'd probably take another quarterback at some point. But I think round 6 is too high for Tom Brady. Back to the draft at hand, though. Round 7, I did go back and get my 4th running back. I got Amir Abdullah, who I know what you may be thinking. I'm taking entirely way too many Lions players at this point. And I will say he's not even the last Lions player that I take, which is a little bit crazy, but he still is a number 1 running back. And to get a number 1 running back for your running back number 4 is a pretty decent steal, especially. And at this point, the quarterbacks we're into that the lower starting tier of quarterback. I'm okay with that. So going back into round 8, I get my 4th wide receiver. I get Allen Hurns, who I think that guy, it's probably a steal at number 8. So going into round 9, I get my tight end and Jimmy Graham, who I think that's probably a really accurate place to draft Jimmy Graham until he really proves that he can become what he was when he was in New Orleans. People are going to have their doubts. But I really do think he's going to have a decent season this year. The Seahawks were figuring out how to use him correctly before he got hurt last season, and then unfortunately the injury bug hit, and you can't say that the injury bug won't hit him again. But I think Jimmy Graham will still have a good season. Coming back around in round 10, I picked up. I started going for depth and for shots in the dark. I went with the rookie wide receiver Michael Thomas in New Orleans. Round 11, I finally get my first quarterback, and I went with Kirk Cousins, which this is a 12-team league, and Kirk Cousins, I think he really is a starter in a 12-team fantasy league. If you're talking about a 10-team league, you're really pushing it, because there's only 10 teams, and there's probably a better quarterback out there than Kirk Cousins. He's going to perform pretty well for you in some points, but he's not a starter in 10-team leagues. Definitely not a starter in 18 leagues, but 12 and higher, Kirk Cousins should be a starter in most leagues. So coming back around in the 12th round, I went and got my guy CJ Prosise, who I've been high on. I'm fine getting him in round 12. I'd even be fine going a little bit higher to grab him, maybe going up to the 9th round. I don't want to go too much higher than that, but with what else was around there, I could have taken another backup quarterback just in case Kirk Cousins didn't work out. There was Derek Carr out there, and I was kind of hoping that another quarterback would fall to me when it got back to me again round 13, but people had the same idea. I was targeting Tony Romo and Matt Stafford, but all those guys went in between me. So when it got back to me in round 13, I still went and got a guy who I think highly of in Jameis Winston, who does have the potential to have a really decent season. Coming back again in round 14, I get my 3rd Detroit Lion, another guy who has some potential, TJ Jones, and we'll get more into him when we go into the news with the NFL, but he does have some high upside. And then with the last 2 rounds, I used on my kicker and defense. I got a Roberto Aguayo, the rookie in Tampa Bay, and then the Buffalo Bills in 6 weeks in round 16. And that is my draft philosophy. Is I don't want to draft a kicker or a defense until the last rounds. There really is no reason to draft either of those positions super high. They don't score you unless you're in a league where defenses and kickers really make a difference and they score like running backs and wide receivers. There's no value drafting them higher. There were people in this mock draft who drafted, I think somebody drafted the Bengals in like round 9, which it's ridiculous. Yeah, you may get the best defense, but at what price? What player did you not draft because you wanted to be the first guy to draft a defense? So I beg you to not draft a defense or a kicker before the last at least the last couple rounds in your draft. So my starting lineup in a standard ESPN league would be quarterback Kirk Cousins, running back Ezekiel Elliott, running back 2 Doug Martin, wide receiver Keenan Allen, wide receiver 2 Kelvin Benjamin, tight end Jimmy Graham. At flex, it would be a split somewhere between Matt Jones, Marvin Jones, and Allen Hurns. Kicker Roberto Aguayo, defense Buffalo Bills, which I think that is a very even team. I think it's set at running back. Ezekiel Elliott and Doug Martin could carry that team. And if they don't get hurt, Keenan Allen and Kelvin Benjamin are 2 very solid wide receivers. And at flex, you can play the matchups. If Matt Jones turns into a stud, he can either be your flex all year, or you can trade him for maybe you can go out and get a better quarterback. Because I think really the weakness on this team would be quarterback. You have Kirk Cousins. He's a game manager in the NFL, and he's a game manager on this team as constructed. Jameis Winston will probably get some starts over Kirk Cousins if this were a real team. So this is just one mock draft, though. And there are some mock drafts that you go into and people will be dumb. If you go into a draft lobby and the first pick overall is Doug Martin, or somebody takes Tom Brady first overall, somebody is messing with that draft lobby. I would advise get out of it. But they do have some merit to going on ESPN, logging on, maybe at least do one mock draft, so kind of where players should be slotting in. It really does help in the long run, because once you get into your real draft, you want to know what's going to be happening, and you want to have an idea where players should be going. So now we're going to get into the NFL news, and there is a ton of news with the opening of training camp. And I will say right now, a lot of this stuff is information that you're just going to have to watch as the preseason goes on, because a lot of it's nagging injuries, guys coming off of injuries, guys being on PUP list, and when are they going to practice? So this is stuff that you're going to have to watch for. I will keep an eye on, and as the news comes in, and as you listen to the podcast, I will update you on this stuff and let you know when guys are healthy and if they are 100% ready to go. So there are some big news outside of injuries, though, and the biggest is the big holdout in free agency this year, which is really surprising. The quarterback for the New York Jets, Ryan Fitzpatrick, he finally signed a 1-year contract. He got $12 million with an additional $3 million that he could get in incentives if they make a deep playoff run, which I think this team really is built to win now. With Brandon Marshall and Eric Decker, those are 2 guys. They aren't getting any younger, but they still are producing at a high level. They went out and signed Matt Forte, he's a really good running back, but he's also going to be a good receiving option for Ryan Fitzpatrick. So with Fitzpatrick in there, that bumps up the entire Jets team. If Geno Smith was going to be the quarterback for this team, I would I would want to stay as far away from the Jets. Brandon Marshall would have still been competent, but not as good as what he will be with Ryan Fitzpatrick now. So that's really exciting news for the Jets. Obviously, it's going to be on Ryan Fitzpatrick now if he wants to really get paid. And if he doesn't succeed this year, he may have screwed himself. He had $24 million on the table for 3 years. And he's going for $12 million in 1 year. But obviously, if he does good, he's going to get paid. The other big news this week, which I actually kind of forgot about this guy because he's just always been super high and not playing, and that is Cleveland Browns wide receiver Josh Gordon. He got reinstated, after sitting out all of last year, being banned for the use of marijuana. He is now reinstated in the NFL, and he's going to miss the first 4 games of the season. And another interesting note is he went in for his team physical, and he's not actually going to be able to start the preseason because he has a quad injury. But if he can stay healthy, and he's going to be in a really good situation because usually when guys have to serve these suspensions, they can't have any dealings with the team. But I think because they've seen what Josh Gordon is, and he needs to be around a good system, a good support group, is he's actually going to be able to travel and be with the team during his 4-game suspension. So that is really good news because with a new system, he's going to be able to be there for practices. So you're going to have to factor in Josh Gordon in your drafts. I'd probably put him somewhere in the middle. That's where I'd feel comfortable drafting him because he's going to have to sit out 4 games. And you're just not really sure what he's going to do when he comes back. You don't know if he's going to be able to return to the level where he was. But if he can, that is a complete boost for your team. That's like getting a Tom Brady 4 games into a suspension. So really keep an eye on what Josh Gordon is doing in training camp and see how he progresses. News I told you last week, Le'Veon Bell. Everyone knows. He is apparently being suspended the first 4 games of the year. He is confident. He's thinking that he's not even going to serve anything. And now news comes out that the appeal for his 4-game suspension is going to be taking place in the second week of August. So we should have an answer on what's going on with Le'Veon Bell in the next couple weeks. And like I said before, if you can hold off on your fantasy drafts, do so because Le'Veon Bell, if he's not suspended, he is absolutely a first-round pick. But if this 4-game suspension is upheld, I think it drops him down to the second round in drafts. Especially in a 10-team league, I see him sliding to the second round of draft. But obviously he's also coming back from injury. So if you are draft Le'Veon Bell with caution, and I would really, really suggest going out and getting D'Angelo Williams as well. Another guy coming back from injury, but he was really good in replacement for Le'Veon Bell when he got hurt. Atlanta Falcons wide receiver Julio Jones tweaked something in the opening day of training camp practice. They say that he could have kept practicing, but there was no really reason to push things at the beginning of training camp. And coming off of a gigantic year last year, they need to have him if the Falcons are going to have any success this year. So again, you're going to have to monitor Julio Jones. It shouldn't really affect his draft status at all right now. For the San Francisco 49ers, Torrey Smith enters camp as the number 1 on their depth chart, which I think he's kind of a sleeper. Torrey Smith, he was never really huge in Baltimore, but I think in this new Chip Kelly offense, it's going to be interesting to see what Torrey Smith can do. So keep an eye on what he's doing. On the Kansas City Chiefs, Jamal Charles, they were hoping that he'd be able to make the beginning of training camp, but he was listed on the PUP list to begin. I think that's really just a precaution. He's their stud, and they're gonna wait as long as they can and make sure that he is 100% before they give him the ball. And he's likely to be back for week 1, but he's a guy now coming off of his second ACL injury in the opposite knee, so you're going to have to watch. Cowboys Ezekiel Elliott, there's, these guys, these NFL players, they can't get out of the way of themselves. And, Ezekiel Elliott, he's under investigation for a domestic violence allegation against a former girlfriend. We don't know if this is just some girl who's trying to cash in on a payday, or if they're just trying to ruin this kid's life. And we don't know. This may be completely true, that Ezekiel Elliott is a bad man, and that he's a domestic violence guy. But until this really comes through, it does really have people's hands tied. We saw what it did to Ray Rice's career. I'm hoping for the kid's sake that it doesn't ruin his career. Hopefully it is just hearsay, but it's something that we're going to have to watch, because if he is going to be facing any sort of suspension, it's, fantasy football really should be the last thing on our minds with Ezekiel Elliott. So keep in mind, or you're going to have to watch and see what happens with Ezekiel Elliott. Again, going back to the Atlanta Falcons, Tevin Coleman they're looking to add him more into this offense. He had the starting position last year before he got hurt, and Devontae Freeman just really put the stranglehold on that starting role when he took over. But now with the running back coach Bobby Turner saying that they want they want to lessen his carries so they can keep him fresh for the entire year, Tevin Coleman is going to have some role, and they may even use him for some kickoff return. So, if you're a league where you get points for that, it's something to keep in mind. Tevin Coleman may have a little bit more value in those leagues. Pittsburgh Steelers, Ladarius Green placed on the PUP list, and he had off-season surgery on his ankle, and he's not fully recovered yet. And that's something you got to worry about, because Ladarius Green, he's looking probably to be top 10 tight end this year. But he, it's like all San Diego Chargers tight ends. They seem to have injury problems. Just like Antonio Gates, Ladarius Green seems to always be injured. So keep an eye on him, see if he can get healthy. Another tight end, Seahawks Jimmy Graham. They're saying that he remains on track for week 1. He's progressing, and they're saying that there's no setbacks, but they aren't putting in a concrete timetable, and he's likely not going to participate when the Seahawks open training camp. Staying in Seattle, Thomas Rawls also likely to miss the start of training camp. He was a guy who they were saying they were thinking he was going to be 100% ready coming back from his leg injury, but they're going to kind of hold off, and they rightfully should, because this is the first year they're going to be without Marshawn Lynch, and I think they've invested a lot into Thomas Rawls being the starter. Now, I do have a lot of faith in CJ Prosise being a decent backup for this team, but for Pete Carroll, wanting Thomas Rawls to be the starter, he had promised last year, and they're going to want him to be 100% before he really starts really participating or even going in training camp and playing in preseason games. Some good news on the injury list. Giants Victor Cruz, he's not going to start the training camp on the PUP list, and he's actually going to practice when the Giants take the field, which it's huge for the Giants, because with Odell Beckham Jr., there really was a hole at wide receiver number 2, which I think they were initially looking at their rookie wide receiver Sterling Shepard. But if you get Victor Cruz back healthy, I mean, you're not sure what you're going to get out of him, but if he can return to 70 or 80% of what he was able to do before, that's going to be an asset for the New York Giants. More injury news. I know, it's crazy. Washington Redskins Josh Doctson, the Redskins are not going to let him practice until he's fully 100%. He's dealing with a foot and an Achilles injury, and they invested the 22nd overall pick in the guy, and I can see why they're not too keen on rushing him in there, because there is some pretty decent talent there. They already have Pierre Garçon and Deshaun Jackson. They have Jordan Reed, who is probably their main receiving option at tight end. And Jamison Crowder was pretty serviceable when he played last season. So it's something to keep an eye on with Josh Doctson, because if he misses too much time, then you're starting to worry about if he's really ready to get up to NFL speed. There's a transition period, and there's something to be said about rookies who miss significant time in training camp. They don't always, and especially at the wide receiver position, it's hard to come in and just immediately pick up, and especially in the NFL where the wide receiver tree, the route tree, is completely different and completely diverse from what these kids are asked to do in college. It's gonna really, you're gonna want to hope Josh Doctson, he heals quickly and he's able to get into camp and really start to know what's going on. The Denver Bronco quarterback situation, it really looks to be a three-guy race. When they came out on the field on Thursday, Mark Sanchez was the starter, but they're saying going into Friday that Trevor Siemian is going to get at least 50% of the first-team reps. So, and then Paxton Lynch is even saying that he thinks that he could start right away. So it's a toss-up there in Denver right now. I still fully expect Mark Sanchez to get the job, but I think there's something to be said about this Trevor Siemian kid. I think he could be a fan favorite, and if Sanchez struggles early, he's going to be on a tight leash, and we could see Trevor Siemian or Paxton Lynch earlier than we really expected. That does it for NFL news, and I'm going to take a quick break. When I come back, I'm going to talk about some players who you're going to want to look at and be careful with because they're coming off of injuries. We'll discuss them and where you might want to look at them in the draft. And as always, I'll have my King's Decree. You're listening to the Fantasy Nerd Show on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. The Fantasy Nerd Show is sponsored by the Fan Up Network. They've developed the ultimate fantasy football app. It's a one-stop shop for everything you need. You can track teams and scores across multiple platforms, get latest injury and player news, and access to expert advice. See the hot trends with waiver pickups and drops. It has everything you need to manage all your fantasy football teams. Android users can get the app in the Play Store, and an iPhone version is now available in the App Store. Go to fanupnetwork.com to learn more and follow them on Twitter at fanupnetwork. Welcome back to the Fantasy Nerd Show on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. Thanks for spending some time with us. And I'm talking with you about my favorite subject, fantasy football. And I'm going to talk with you now about players who are coming off of injuries who you're going to want to have a little bit of concern and caution going into the draft this year. Starting out in quarterbacks, obviously you got to look at Tony Romo. The dude always seems to be having something wrong with his back. Last year it was his collarbone, and he just can't seem to stay healthy. They have this great offensive line, but the guy is just a China doll. He can't stay on the field, so it's something you're really going to have to take into consideration when you're going into the drafts this year. And I think at this point he's not really looked at as a fantasy starter just because you can't guarantee that he's going to be your starter the entire season. He definitely has the potential to be a really good fantasy quarterback for you. When he does guys like Des Bryant, Jason Witten is getting a little long in the tooth, as is Tony Romo, and those guys are going to start to decline, but you want to hope that they have something left in the tank. So if Tony Romo can stay healthy, he's going to be good for you. But, he's at 36 right now, and he just seems to be breaking down every year. It's something you're going to want to watch this season if you do take him. And if you do draft him, I highly suggest you getting a decent backup just in case he doesn't go the full season. Next quarterback I want to look at is Joe Flacco. He's not really a superstar, but he's a really good backup and a guy who you can start a couple games. He's coming off of an ACL tear, and he also tore his MCL. So he underwent surgery. And the biggest thing with him is going to be watching if he has confidence in himself, because it wasn't an injury where a guy hit him in his knee and it tore him. I think his offensive lineman fell into him, so it's going to be him feeling comfortable in that pocket. So watch him throughout training camp. And to finish up quarterbacks, he's probably one of the top guys on your list, and that's Andrew Luck. He was a top guy last year. He burned me last year. And the lacerated kidney, that doesn't really concern me too much, because it's a freak injury, and I don't think that's something that you're going to have to worry about going forward, that something's going to happen again. But I think more of a concern is that before that injury happened, he was having injuries with his shoulder and his throwing shoulder, and that's something that's really concerning for a quarterback and a guy that the Indianapolis Colts invested a ton of money into this year. And it's a guy that you're going to have to invest a really high fantasy pick if you want him to be on your team. And you don't want to expect that he's going to burn you and that he's going to have more issues, but it's going to be something you're worried about. And I think going into this camp, they did improve their offensive line, and that's really going to help keeping Andrew Luck on his feet instead of, planting his shoulder in the ground by some 300-pound defensive tackle. I think the Colts are also going to want Andrew Luck to be more of that pocket passer and to protect himself more. We saw it in Washington with Robert Griffin III when he was this great mobile quarterback, but as soon as he goes down, he injures his knee, he takes everything away, and then it's hard to really be something that you're not. And Andrew Luck, he is really more of a mobile quarterback than people give him credit for. And he's a big boy. He likes to deliver hits, but that's something that I think the coaches are going to want him to avoid that more going into this year, because they would rather have him for the entire season than have him fight for an extra yard and possibly lose him for a couple weeks. So Andrew Luck, I wouldn't really worry too much about where you're drafting him. Last year he was as high as can be. Aaron Rodgers and Andrew Luck last year were first and second round picks, if you ask me. But after this year, I don't think any quarterbacks are really going to be taken in the first 2 rounds unless you're in a league where quarterbacks are really highly valued. So definitely watch Andrew Luck. The running back position, it's a guy that we've talked about a lot on the show, and that's Le'Veon Bell. He's going to be he does benefit a little bit from if he does serve his 4-game suspension, because that's going to be another 4 weeks to help heal his torn MCL and PCL ligaments. And it's something all those ligaments in your knee and your leg, they severely affect running backs, and that's why we see those types of injuries in the guys who are cutting. And it's going to be interesting to see what Le'Veon Bell can do in the offseason. If they even, I'm not even sure if they bring him out at all for a preseason game. But if you do see him, it's going to be interesting to see what he can do and if he can come back. Adrian Peterson is that's the highest that we've seen a guy come back from an ACL injury and just still be at the top of his game. And Le'Veon Bell does have age on his side. He's still a young guy, and you want to hope that he can come back at 100% and still be the guy that he was. But it's something you're going to have to watch. And as I said last week, if it's me, I'm not drafting him in the first round. I feel way more comfortable drafting him in the second round. But to each his own, and that was my own gut decision. That's my decree. We'll see what happens at the end of the year. See if I'm right or not. Another running back to watch out for, a guy who came on hot last year, but really fizzled because he was hurt the majority of the time, was Carlos Hyde. And he's a guy who he had a stress fracture in his ankle, but it's something that he is actually able to play through, which now he kind of regrets because he was hoping that it was just going to be able to heal on his own. But it just it doesn't really make sense that something's going to heal when you're going out every 7 days and running extremely hard on it. So he had surgery to repair his ankle, and you're going to want to watch his recovery. And if he comes back week 1, I think that's what they're expecting him to be. And they are coming into a new offense with Chip Kelly. The Chip Kelly offense didn't really work for DeMarco Murray, but Carlos Hyde, he is kind of familiar with a shotgun style. He was in a shotgun style offense when he was in Ohio State, so maybe the transition will be easy. You never know, but it's something you're going to have to watch. And then the last running back that you're going to have to watch, Jamal Charles, a guy who has been a first-round pick for the last couple of years, since he last tore his ACL. It's something you're going to have to watch because, he 5 years ago, he tore his one ACL, and now he tears his other one. So he's still young enough where you think, young, he's 30. So that really is super old for a running back. But can he come back like Adrian Peterson and compete? And stuff going against Jamal Charles is Charkandrick West and Spencer Ware, the two running backs who came in to replace Charles when he went down last year. They were serviceable, and the Chiefs really are. That offense is dink and dunk. Alex Smith is going to pass a dump off pass here and there, and they really rely on Jamal Charles. But I think even if he does come back healthy, we're going to see healthy doses of West and Ware to try and alleviate some of those carries that Jamal Charles has, trying to minimize the wear. Because even if he does come back healthy, he's another year older, and it's going to be trying to keep him for the playoffs. If the Chiefs want to have a run in NFL playoffs, it's going to hurt us fantasy-wise because when Jamal Charles isn't getting carries, it just frustrates the hell out of his owners. At the wide receiver position, Dez Bryant, dealing with the Jones fracture from last year. He was able to come back from it in the later part of the season, but obviously he wasn't. Tony Romo was out. He wasn't working with him, and he did have to have a second surgery in the offseason to kind of clean up that ankle. And they're saying that he's making progress in camp. But it's somebody you're going to have to watch for. Has missed some time. He's held out, and he does seem to be injury prone every now and then. He's one of those guys who he'll just show up on the injury report, and you're not sure He shows up in the injury report and then he goes out and has a 10 catch, 150-yard day. But then if he may be, probable on the injury report and then goes out and plays 2 downs and then he's out the rest of the game. So Des Bryant, a guy you definitely want to go with caution, but definitely the high upside. Jordy Nelson, another guy who's getting older, coming off of that ACL, the kind of the freak ACL injury last year. He was really the story that he didn't get touched and he just went down. But the good news with him is that the tear was only in his ACL. It didn't bother any of his other PCLs or MCLs or any of his other ligaments. So that does work in his favor. And I think because it happened so early in the preseason, that just works in his favor. So I think Jordy Nelson, out of all those guys who really are dealing with ligament tears who were out all last season, I think Nelson has the best chance to come back and really kind of pick up where he left off with Aaron Rodgers. And Aaron Rodgers needs Jordy Nelson. And lastly, for wide receivers, Sammy Watkins, the dude, he always seems to be something wrong with his ankle, something wrong with his hamstring, and he dealt with surgery in the offseason again. So it's something you're going to have to watch for. Obviously, if he's healthy, Tyrod Taylor is going to want to find Sammy Watkins because he's a really solid talent, but he needs to stay on the field. So when you're drafting, be cautious. I think out of all the tight end or all of the wide receivers that I just mentioned, I think Sammy Watkins is probably he has the most red flags on him, and I draft him cautiously. If there is another wide receiver, I may take him over Sammy Watkins, or I might even take a running back over him. It kind of depends where you are at the draft. If it's at a point where it's way too low for Sammy Watkins to even be there, you need to scoop him up just because of the possibility that he has. But definitely go into your drafts with caution about all of these players. That just about does it for this episode, but I still have my King's Decree. And my King's Decree this week is that Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver A.J. Green will have his worst statistical season this year. Now, I'm looking at all of his stats from 2011 to 2015. It's saying, 2011 and 2014 are the only seasons that he actually missed games. But A.J. Green, he's always another guy who just always seems to be a pulled hamstring from being kind of removed from the game. He always seems to be able to make it to game time, but if he can't go, they pretty much pull him at the drop of a hat. He's a guy with a lot of potential, but he had 2 really good seasons in 2012 and 2013 where he had 1,300 yards and 1,400 yards respectively, and 11 touchdowns in each of those. The rest of those, he had about 1,000. He had about 1,000 in 2011 and 2014. And last year in 2015, he had just under 1,300 and 10 touchdowns. Now, I know I may be a little crazy because, he finished up the last year with Andy Dalton hurt. But I don't know. I have a feeling A.J. Green is a guy who he just doesn't seem like he wins you fantasy games. I mean, there's the occasional time where he kind of blows up, but just looking at his game log from last season, let's see, 5 receptions, 3 receptions, 10, 7, 6, 4, 11, 4, 5, 4, 6, 5, 6, 1, 5, 4. He had a good 8-game stretch where he had 6 or less catches, which that hurts. And, he was benefited by touchdowns in some of those games. But if it's hard to have a touchdown reliant receiver. You want to have a guy who gets a lot of receptions, gets a lot of yards, and the touchdown is just the icing on the cake. But you don't want to have to rely on a guy always having to score a touchdown. And with Andy Dalton coming off the injury, it's I think it was his thumb or his wrist. Is he going to be able to come back and fully, have everything that he had last year? They still have Tyler Eifert, and I really see them as a run-first team with Giovanni Bernard and Jeremy Hill. They're going to grind out games, especially in that AFC North division where it's defensive driven and they're going to have hard fought battles. So that's why I think AJ Green is going to have his worst statistical season, and he's likely going to be on the outside of the top 15 in fantasy football wide receivers this year, and that is my King's decree. That'll do it for this episode of the Fantasy Nerds. Hopefully next week I can get back with my brother Joel. We can break down even more going into this fantasy draft season. We'll have more info from training camp. But until then, I am Jason Jarvi. Follow me on Twitter at Jarvi the King. Big thanks to the Fan Up Network for sponsoring the show. And until next week, later, nerds.